Why is dictator Putin hysterical and berating Russian generals, and what is going on with Putin's appearance? We are not only talking about this today with the host of Khodorkovsky Live, Sergey Aslanian. Sergey, I am glad to welcome you.
Hello, it's good to see you.
Before we begin our communication, we traditionally address our audience, our viewers. If you're going to watch this video, like it, go ahead. If you don't like it, you will take it in the end. Be sure to write your city where you are watching us from and subscribe to this YouTube channel. It will all help to promote this video, and the messages that we will discuss today, they will be heard by as many people as possible. Sergey, let's start with some good news for Ukraine and for the whole world, about our intelligence hitting 2 Su-57 fighter jets. Ukrainian intelligence told us about Putin's actually hysterical reaction to this. Putin is furious. Our intelligence officers have information that the reaction in Crimea is really very hot and tangible. In your opinion, could Putin really react to such news, because the Su-57 is actually, as we call it, Putin's favorite toy, and will the shoulder straps fly after such defeats?
Putin is no stranger to the loss of anything very significant, large scale. He started with the loss of the Kursk boat, which, in principle, made no impression on him, and he continued his entire presidential itinerary with certain losses. And from him, for example, Ukraine took away several strategic bombers, which he also liked to brag about very much, because there are no analogues. And in general, he has an abundant toolkit for bragging, and here's something else that somehow died somewhere. But treating the Su-57 as a favorite toy is actually not so unambiguous, because if it suddenly got off the ground, went into echelon and even flew somehow, then surrender the enemy, freeze and lie down. Because, you know, some super airplane, if suddenly it breaks down, doesn't fly anywhere, the pilot rolls under a neighboring hangar somewhere and, in principle, is incapacitated, then yes. You don't understand anything. This is experimental work. This is still the 5th generation, but in fact it is already the 6th. Tomorrow morning we will wake up and it will be the 7th. You know, we need to finish off another place, so you shouldn't think that the 7th generation is like this. And so now, on the one hand, we realize that really what we can expect from Putin is that at least something like a little bit in the know, a little bit aware. In general, of course, his life is mainly devoted to narcissism. He's great, he's got a big pool, he's got red caviar, he's got the general in the hallway. And then there is some kind of war, which, in fact, is an element of entertainment for him. And if, in principle, he had been very seriously aware of this war, immersed and worried about it, he would, for example, as one of the options, have appointed at least a military leader as Minister of Defense, and not himself. And he put the accountant in jail. Because, in principle, he does not expect that some accountant or some Ministry of Defense will suddenly win him this war. He himself, so slowly, like the famous Stalinist blows. But in general it speaks a little bit about a man who somehow does not have everything organized in his head in a very logical way. Because there's nothing to count on but the Ministry of Defense. So he makes some kind of change, swaps one of his cardboard generals for another paper one. And from this it follows that war in his understanding is not the same as in ours. And the planes are not the same as in ours. We look and realize, actually, this is an extremely expensive product. It is indeed still recommended for operation with unclear result and destroy 1 Su-57, 2 Su-57s. This is exactly the kind of loss that is being contributed to Wikipedia. Because behind each of these airplanes destined to be great from birth, ahead of their time, comes a long, accumulating list of accomplishments and failures over the years. And the Americans, for example, on their F-16s, on the same Wikipedia post absolutely all the engagements, absolutely all the losses and absolutely all the victories over decades of operation. And the Su-57 started with the fact that it died on the airfield, not that it did not realize where it came from in its cradle, but did not even break to the other side in its sleep. As he slept, so he was buried. And in terms of the army, which is great, grandiose, representing a superpower, it's an absolute disgrace. This is completely unacceptable. It doesn't happen that way. It is impossible to suppose that one can be so rash, to the extent of sleeping through everything in the world, that your pride was suddenly taken and quietly, as if it were just a homeless person, shot behind the barn. And on the other hand, before that, Ukraine attacked the Kremlin in the same way. And the drone hit the dome, which the whole globe knows. It is a symbol of the country, a symbol of the city and a symbol of the Kremlin. Yes, you think, we also build and repair it here. What is there? Paint, wallpaper. Now a team of Tajiks will come, quickly repair this roof, nothing to worry about. So it would seem that if you evaluate this in terms of military action, it's a disgrace, it's a failure, it's a disaster there, horrible. And if you look at Putin's actions, it's clear that it's no big deal. A new cardboard minister, we'll make a new one if we have to. So what about strategic bombers? And, by the way, it seems to be my favorite bridge. Come on, it's not a big deal. We'll take the railroad if you need us. And the railway is also there. Well, okay, in the end, with large troops. Oh, they were also drowned. Come on, let's think of something. And then there is the Su-57. Well, how much more do we have left? There are 3 more pieces. Well, then we live. That is, we see that our worlds, our orbits do not intersect at all. Because the logic of a dictator, a man who went on several crimes, and, in fact, his whole way was criminal. His entire biography begins with rigging elections, fighting the opposition, destroying his political opponents, execution by prison, exile from the country, usurpation of power. Such a list of crimes. And for us, it's a reason for The Hague and a reason for Valadol to grab our heart and say, and this is what's being done in the 21st century by who? Head of state. And for him, in fact, this is a lifestyle. And his lifestyle does not include compassion, worry and regret about what, the Kursk submarine, or some Ryazan Sahara, or the Chechen war, or the same Su-57. So we look at it a little bit differently, but we see that it is no accident that there is such a difference between our worlds. And, unfortunately, this war, it is the result of a completely different attitude, to people, to morality, to lives, because for him it is a commodity.
In continuation of this topic, I can't help but ask you about the fact that the armed forces of Ukraine have actively minus a huge number of air defense systems in Crimea this week. Actually good news for us, which is definitely worth a separate bark from our audience. Some military experts suggest that the active destruction of air defense systems is a preparation for the de-occupation of Crimea. This can be viewed in different ways. But I want to ask the following: how is the loss of Crimea still possible? How the Putin regime, in principle, we understand how it will react, because the rats are the first to flee the ship. But how will Putin personally react to the loss of Crimea, in your opinion?
Putin has had some very iconic places to covet since he was a child, ever since he was not taken to a pioneer camp. Sochi, first of all. That's why there's Formula 1, and the Winter Olympics, and the townships, and brothels, and friends are sure to build their palaces there, because it's an iconic place for him. And Crimea is included in exactly the same list of iconic places. He does not need Crimea in principle for farming, for industry, for the growth of territory, because he is quite calmly parting with the territory. He gave China everything that China asked for. And in this regard, the acquisition of some other land is actually an excuse. This is because people probably like it. And if people say to them, look, we have a little more collective farm beds, we can't even develop our country, we haven't even built roads, and here we have some more undeveloped land that we need to do something about, people will probably be happy about it. Putin, of course, loves Crimea very much, and for him Crimea has some semantic meaning. He has something to do with Crimea, a kind of fixation on the fact that, perhaps, he was not given a peach there, or his father and mother didn't get a ticket, or someone didn't let him go to Artek, or somehow offended him. Crimea is important to him. If something happens to Crimea, because the seizure of Crimea was precisely because it has some significance for Putin, not for the Russian Federation. And it was important to grab him and say, this is mine. And now bam, and it's gone, and it's not mine. Yes, here, probably, he will again exchange some paper for an inflatable minister, because they will not forgive. There will definitely be very serious consequences. Crimea is Putin's ancestral territory. Not an inch of native land, not any predecessors who owned this land, and so on. That is, the list of reasons why Crimea is ours, but not yours, is precisely formed in his head. This is important for him.
You know, I also want to discuss Putin's health, the health of the dictator. And then this week came a rather interesting material from ex-KGB agent, journalist, writer Sergei Aslanian. And he noticed the details in the dictator's appearance on the forum. And a cyst or a tumor was noticed on Putin's eye. How much do you personally, Sergei, believe in the story of Putin's poor health? And if you look back at the history in general of dictators, how do they often end up, and how do you think Putin might end up?
Putin will live another 700 years. Especially a small appanage prince, the owner of Tatarstan, Minakhanov, asked for 491 trillion rubles for this purpose. A little more than 490 trillion rubles for the colonization of Jupiter. And on one of the 4 satellites of Jupiter will be deployed economic free zone Alabuga, where they will deal with the human genome and life extension. And Minakhanov said that, in principle, according to his forecasts, human life will be, well, at least Minakhanov has 700 years. At the same time, Kostin, the owner of the VTB24 bank, has also decided that he should, perhaps, and 50 billion has already been thrown to Minakhanov in order to live 700 years. Therefore, Putin will clearly be the third in this campaign. And even in those times, when it was not necessary to fly into space to live so long and it was possible to do it on Earth, we remember the successes of the 4th Main Medical Directorate, which was very good at keeping Brezhnev upright even after his death. It is an old anecdote that today, in his 99th year of life, Leonid Brezhnev took office after a severe prolonged illness, without regaining consciousness. That is, we remember that 3 days before his death, Brezhnev stood at the mausoleum and took part in the parade on November 7th. That is, medicine, it was omnipotent for a very long time, even under Soviet rule. Although, of course, it was based on foreign pharmacology. So any important person for the country, they can firstly die from Novichok poison in 1 second, and secondly they can live forever. And the length of life of the same Brezhnev shows that medicine perfectly copes with the tasks. If necessary, they will repair the whole body in the best possible way. And of course, there was a serious problem when, for example, Andropov, who was no longer even suitable for a donor kidney transplant operation, well, because after all, work, while you need to destroy the country and its ideology, it wears out the body. And the people then gloating just generated a joke, why Brezhnev traveled all over the world, and Andropov sat eyelessly in the Kremlin, because Brezhnev worked on batteries, and Andropov from the network. Well, that's it, a year and a half, the same famous gun carriage race, then Chernenko with bronchial asthma. Asthma in the Soviet Union did not know how to treat, and asthma is an incurable disease, people always die from it. But otherwise some cardiology, transplantation of other organs, especially we see that Putin for the last decades is always in obituary mode. He is buried by absolutely all observers, all analysts, all specialists. It is clear that he is hiding his suitcase. That is, he has 2 suitcases. Usually, all sorts of geopoliticians have one. There is a red button, and he has 2. It has a red button and something brown to keep out of the hands of the enemy. But no matter how he dies, first of all, it does not concern us, we do not know about it. The Voice of America will know about this, as it was with Brezhnev. But definitely not the Soviet people, and it will live a very long time, just to the point of an unsightly length. And the fact that something appeared on his face somewhere, after all, the grandfather is over 70 years old. In general, his Botox gerontology is already miraculous in itself. Those doctors who will come out of hiding after his death and say this is us, they can open a cosmetic medicine clinic right away because there will be a shaft of people coming to them, especially fading actors, poets and playboys, to look exactly the same at 70. Excellent work. But something did not work out. A piece of plaster fell off, a little vitamins were not delivered. The West is malicious a little, there is a lack of some drugs. Everything will get better. The next time we see, we don't know if it's Putin or his double, triple, quadruple, quintuple, but what we will be presented with will be flawless. It will be smooth. It will be the same with hesitations, something that tells us about the greatness of Russia and without external diagnoses.
How much do you, Sergei, believe in this story of a possible palace coup, or could Putin still end up with a random snuff box or a scarf?
He's already worked up a few snuffers on the head, but we can see that his entourage, the structure of the Federal Protective Service, is working flawlessly. It is not by chance that when Putin is just trying to go out to the people, welding the manholes of the sewer system, so that no surprise will come out of there, nothing will be allowed near him, not a single fly will get through, the bedders who are there checking on him, tasting the food, looking at what smells in the street today, whether the great leader, Comrade Brezhnev, can be allowed to go for a walk in the street or let him graze here on the lawn in a closed space. Everything there is so protocol-less, and these people are so committed to it and to their paychecks and to their future position as governor that it's basically unacceptable. While we remember, in itself, this situation, it began to form as early as personal security, super loyalty and extremely elaborate instructions on the example of Stalin. Stalin wanted to cut Stalin, if not half of the country, then a huge number of people, and moreover, no matter how people with impeccable biographies in the NKVD in the inner circle of those who will guard, all the same everyone understood perfectly well what was happening in the country. And everyone, if not directly, then through one hand of the sheikh, had the repressed, the dead, the injured. And yet Stalin, in the 30s, and no matter how young these 20-year-olds of his guards were, one way or another, somewhere near them lived a generation that talked about what the Russian Empire was like, and how much it was possible to live there, and what is happening in Russia now. That is, there were plenty of reasons to stab the then beloved Stalin or smash his head with a stool, almost every second person, even from his inner circle. And yet, they were sincerely afraid of him, and considered it necessary not to touch him. And we remember that when the Great Patriotic War broke out, and Stalin crammed into a crack and was waiting for the Politburo to come to arrest him, removing him from office, to him crawled on their knees, begging to return, to rule and win. Because even in this watershed situation, when there was a formal occasion that frightened Stalin himself, there was no one capable of not only a palace coup, wanted to just a legitimate change of power, when they would take some Molotov, appointed, the same Beria, or, after all, for all cases of life there is a demise season Mikoyan, from Ilyich to Ilyich without heart attack and paralysis. And we remember that Khrushchev was a bloody executioner of the Ukrainian people, and it turned out that he was really ready to loop his biography, to start with blood and finish it with blood, and still there was no reason to finish him off somehow, and there was quite a party way to remove him from power. Brezhnev really didn't bother anyone. In principle, everyone was happy with everything. Apart from political dissidents and those who were imprisoned for sodomy, there was a separate criminal article. And each of them, after all, having adversaries, enemies, opponents, never risked their lives, since no one came that close, except for a couple of assassination attempts on Brezhnev. Yes, indeed, and the KGB worked perfectly even there, catching and neutralizing. Although the cosmonauts were put under shots during the last assassination attempt on Brezhnev, and whether or not there was a shot fired at the cosmonauts, the State Security Committee is silent on the matter. That is, no matter how much the Soviet power at the top mocks the people below, the inner circle is so selective, so impeccable, and so following protocol, you can't get close. Especially since before you could only get seniority, an extra star and an increased pension, but now you will be given a province, and accounts will be unblocked, and, if necessary, a passport will be made, and you will go to some Venezuela, Argentina, Brazil, Australia, and you will live out your life there in your Courchevel on the excellent financing of the state. Therefore, especially if you are not Putin's patriot and not his fan, you will not let anyone near you anyway, because you will be paid so much, so warmed up, and all your life problems will be solved to such an extent that it is better to dogpile here for a year or two, to wave a gun or, if anything, to cover your chest with a bulletproof vest, and then you will have a magnificent way not only to retire, but super retirement in a super condition. No, and Putin, of course, is not in danger of any snuff box. Osama bin Laden. Here it is just the scenario showing a possible solution when Osama bin Laden had to be eliminated. They bribed the inner circle. Intelligence worked and tried to establish agents, make contact, rebuy, negotiate. Then it was easier to fly in a helicopter, shoot everyone and fly away.
You have already started talking about Putin's colleagues and other dictators. And here I want to discuss with you the following news that for the first time in 24 years, Putin may visit the DPRK. Then Vietnam will be next in line. During his entire presidency so-called, Putin visited North Korea once only, that's in 2000, that's when he first became president. In your opinion, Sergei, what made Putin go to the North Korea, and how insulting is it in general for Putin to go to a dictator who is actually a head lower or even 2 heads lower than Putin?
The club of dictators is shrinking, and now everyone is worth their weight in gold. Too bad there isn't enough African cannibals in this collection. He would have been quite fun to deal with too. And as far as Korea is concerned, it's a brilliant gesture of diplomacy at the highest level and paying tribute to North Korea's incredible hard work and support. Because the Soviet Union, when it collapsed, it frightened North Korea by leaving it alone in the fight against imperialism, did not provide any support, but so quietly some rivulet may be there across the border, but still boundless funding, when North Korea could safely not starve to death by feeding with the help of the Soviet Union. This stream was closed, the faucet was no longer opened, and North Korea had every reason, if anything, to remember, not to wait, purely in the Asian way, with its stamina and a smile on its face, when finally the Russian brother would turn the other part of his body and also light up with a smile. And now Russia needs help. Russia said, give us shells. Prigozhin's voice and intonation. Korea, where are the shells? And Korea gave everything. And Korea gave more missiles. That is, it was thought that Korea was a loyal ally. In any situation, when even she is wiped off her feet, when she is considered third-rate, when they do not turn their heads in her direction even in response to requests, there are starving people there, there are very serious economic and political problems, a huge number of difficulties with healthcare. The Soviet Union and today's Russia are deaf and dumb about this. And all the less, North Korea remains a loyal friend. In response to this friendship, the first person arrives. Putin hugs. He has already given a brand new Aurus instead of a second-rate Maybach. And now they are embracing. They will come and hug, they will feast. But because this is really the highest level of respect when Putin personally comes. And take a couple of boxes of shells with you, load them into board number 1. It is possible that he will go there on an armored train. After all, these are 2 countries that use armored trains and usually the place is agreed upon at the Cosmodrome. Such a very eclectic juxtaposition of eras, because mankind has never had armored trains dock at a spaceport before. And then the great pale-faced Putin arrives, and the whole of Korea truly rejoices, because for Korea it means that that's it. We have survived the darkest time, now we are revolutionaries again, now we have a common enemy again, capitalism, imperialism and America. And now we will definitely get help, because look how we favored the Russian brother and saved shells for him and missiles under sanctions. Against the embargoes of the entire globe and the intelligence of the entire world, we both produce, export and supply. And look how successfully Russia is fighting with them. Well, out of every 3, maybe 2 explode, kill personnel, but 1 still flies. And therefore, Korea now has a second wind. It is waiting for her favorite leader, the great Kim Jong-un, the great Putin, the Marshall Daddy, who will warm, feed, solve all problems. And he is really able to do it. And at the same time, when Russia loses this war, where to run, to which country, who will definitely not give it away? The Emirates can issue it. America will come and explain what will happen to oil prices. And they will betray Putin. Not just in a package, but at least they will tell you in which dacha of Osama bin Laden he lives. And there will be no Putin. To Venezuela, well, there Maduro will soon get behind the wheel of a bus again and go on to engage in politics from one bus stop to another. After all, he is a bus driver, first of all, and not a politician. Where to run? North Korea will be the most reliable. So it's not enough that they're going to get there now, not enough that they're going to have a good meal, a tasty meal, a hearty meal, after that the tap of prosperity for North Korea may open. And realizing that this is the last bastion, it is necessary to build a normal infrastructure there, to create some semblance of economy, to create some reserves. Because by surrendering Russia, and Putin is surrendering Russia, he will part with it quite calmly, and he has the money. As eyewitnesses who lie about every occasion in Macau say, there's a lot lying around, so you just have to find an umbrella to hide under. North Korea is perfect for this, no matter how small it is, no matter how surrounded by enemies, it's toothy, it's insane, and everyone realizes you can't take Putin away from Korea. That is why it is necessary to quickly build a small oasis like Gelendzhik, an aqua disco in North Korea. All the more so because Fat Kim, who also changes sisters, nieces, nephews, and grandchildren of some distant relatives for someone else, will support this aqua disco. So Korea has prospects. Now we can print the classics again in large quantities, all three of them. The movie and life begins. And for Putin, it is a perfect opportunity to look for a dacha in the Chongjin neighborhood, somewhere in Pyongyang, just in case. Moreover, there is a shelter and a subway. But Vietnam will disappoint him, because Vietnam is radically different. Vietnam is one of the most amazing economies. This is a country that very quickly shook socialism out of itself. Almost like dust from boots, despite the fact that shoes are not worn there. That is, you just had to go and rinse your feet off socialism in the Mekong and say that, guys, that's enough. This is madness, it is enough. Now let's live according to our minds. Especially since we remember when the parting with the era of socialism, with the economy of socialism, with the politics of socialism took place, it was already clear that Vietnam did not want to. And the famous war between Vietnam and China, 1979. And after that, the world system of socialism ended, and Vietnam has fully understood who is its friend and who is its enemy. Because when he was saving the Kampucheans, the Chinese attacked him in the back, in revenge for this. And since then, Vietnam has been living oriented towards America. Vietnam allowed itself the automotive industry, but Brezhnev did not. When it happens in Vietnam suddenly, what are you? Your lot is to graze on rice beds. And the Vietnamese have the production of Chevrolet, the production of Ford, the production of Hyundai, the production of Toyota and their famous VinFast. When his local oligarch invested money in the economy of the country's revival, built hospitals, universities. By the way, Vong started doing business in Ukraine. It was his instant pasta. He sold this company to Nestlé and returned to Vietnam with the money. He gave a leap at the level of Elon Musk to the economy of the whole country. Now VinFast is listed on the Hong Kong Stock Exchange. It has factories around the world. He bought up everything GM had, starting with the Australian Holden. And it has its headquarters in America. And he is for the prosperity of Vietnam. And Vietnam is not an isolated example. Vietnam, no matter how it may seem from a tourist's perspective, is a country where everyone is wearing flip-flops for some reason, not because there is no money for sneakers. Climate, but otherwise this is not Soviet territory. She is not going to return Cam Ran. It does not need a pat on the shoulder of any Comrade Brezhnev, Comrade Putin. It has its own route and it will not be possible to wedge into it. Therefore, if Putin comes to North Korea to his dacha, in Vietnam he will come to a real foreign country. It will be good if he is not extradited to the Hague Tribunal, because the Vietnamese will do it.
The Times writes that Putin believes that nuclear weapons can bring cold peace. Quite interesting material. I would like to hear your analysis regarding this material. Why is Putin talking about this, and can nuclear weapons really lead to at least some peace?
As for the fact that Putin will press the red button, there are absolutely no illusions, of course. He is losing this war, he has absolutely no powers, he has no arguments to turn the tide of the war, and this war is still, somehow, a favorite pastime. Putin didn't press the red button. Why? Because he doesn't have a red button, he has a bluff, a game, and there is a worldwide unscrupulousness of cowards who prefer not to stick a stick in a den with a bear just in case. And every time we have been discussing for the last 2 years whether there is a nuclear button, whether there is nuclear potential, whether there is a missile, or whether there is no such thing, we remember each time in the circle of those who served in the Red Army and ask each other, actually on the air, to find out. Did you serve in the army? Served. Do you remember what happened there? Did anything work there? Did at least one tank start there on alarm? Could there be at least one car, in case of an emergency, leave the garage and go to the task? In principle, what was normal there? There were fences, roofs did not leak there, the sewerage was not clogged there, guns were firing there, porridge was being cooked. The army was by no means an oasis of precise execution. It is not the Federal Security Service guarding Putin, it is flesh and flesh of the Russian people. I remember how I served in the army, I remember what worked for me, what did not work for me. If, God forbid, there was a war, we would lose it. First, without knowing it had started, and second, if we attempted meaningful action, we would certainly not get the expected result. Because it was the Red Army. Good for a report, but you can't touch it with your finger. Suppose that the nuclear button, the nuclear weapons, the nuclear shield of the homeland is in a different state, in a perfect state. There are other officers, there are other soldiers, there are other materials, there are other technologies, there are other routine maintenance. There are no grounds. Therefore, Putin, in principle, without appealing courage, reckless, would have long had enough to use nuclear weapons. Did not apply, because no. That is why Dmitry Medvedev constantly erases some red lines from morning to night with an eraser. That is why Putin says something about what he thinks about how we will take revenge now. Oh, how we will take revenge. Now we will get up from the potty, now we will find it like toilet paper. After that, we will take such revenge that everyone will be very anxious. He has nothing, and he will bluff due to the weakness of his opponents, who are always scared, because, oh, well, these are the Russians, you know, they're like that. Yes, indeed, the Russian tourists' fire and sword horde that marched through tourist oases all over the world was enough to not have to wait for the Red Army. Chelyabinsk workers and Chelyabinsk housewives vacationing in Turkey have left an indelible mark not only on the history of Turkey. They were still enough for Greece, they were even a little enough for France. Bulgaria was simply trampled by such a landing party that, God forbid, someone else would come there in top-all and boots. That is, an ordinary Russian person in a state of all-inclusive rest. He is already as scary as the Red Army, so if you give him a nuclear baton on top of everything else, the world will definitely lose. That's why everyone is afraid of Russians and maintains this stereotype of fear by analyzing them very diligently, in depth. You know, there is definitely a reason for this. We know, of course, that a nuclear warhead is going to roll out from under the bed, that he's going to take a golf club and launch it at us, and that's what we're going to do here. No problem. Even if it does, it won't explode. It will collapse and will scare everyone else longer with its illusory radiation, because there are no structures in Russia that are clearly working, perfectly performing their functions. And nuclear weapons in this regard, no matter how much they are shaken over them, guarded, and tried to create some fake illusion of prosperity, have not succeeded. It is not like that.
Sergey, thank you for this conversation. I will remind our viewers that we talked with Sергey Aslanian. He is the host of Khodorkovsky Life. If you like this video, like it right now, write a comment where you are watching us from, your city. We are interested in where people are watching us from, the geography of our audience. Also write comments if you agree with the opinion of Sергey Aslanian. Subscribe to our YouTube channel and see you soon on the air on channel 24.
Всего хорошего.